Hey y'all, Danny Davis, the Austin American-Statesman, and this is the Longhorn Confidential. Every week throughout the season, we like to bring on someone who knows a little bit about the team that Texas is playing this weekend. That's something we're doing new this week, this year on the podcast because this podcast has had many iterations. And one of those iterations included the guy who is on with us today to talk about Sam Houston, Mike Craven, former statesman, recruiting expert. Now he is a senior writer over at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. At some point, hopefully during this podcast, we'll hopefully get a chance to talk to him about this. Y'all might know this guy. Mike wrote the cover story for the Bible this season. I don't know if we'll have time to talk about it, but Mike also wrote this book, which is behind me on my bookshelf, The Guide to Texas Football that came out last year. And, if you're by a bookstore or go to dctr.com, that's y'all's website, I believe, you can order that there. It's a really good book. And Mike obviously knows about football throughout the state. So obviously, Sam Houston, let's get into it. Mike, how you doing?
Doing pretty good, doing better than the Bobcats, who have started 0-3 with three 17-point losses. So, been a hard start to the Phil Longo era.
Yes, let's start with that. The Bearkats jumped up to the FBS level in 2023. They were a FCS champion as recently as spring of 21. But how's that transition going down there in Huntsville?
Well, it went really well on the field in 2024. They were able to make a pretty good jump up from year one to year two under former head coach Casey Keeler, who's now at Temple. They won 10 games, were a game away from playing for the Conference USA championship. But behind the scenes, I don't think it's gone as well. It's one thing to make the move up and to have an idea of what it's going to be. It's another to have to deal with the financial consequences of it. And what's unfortunate for Sam Houston is they made the decision to move up before revenue share. And so what they thought it would cost to be an FBS program is not what it costs to be an FBS program now. Like the price of the brick has gone up. And that's been a tough adjustment for Sam Houston. And one of the reasons Casey Keeler left for Temple is because Bobby Williams, the AD at Sam Houston, basically told him, we don't have the resources to keep this going, to win 9 or 10 games and to be competitive with Conference USA right now. So I think on the field, they've had good results. Sam Houston's been a solid football team for a long time, back to like Willie Fritz days. Um, but it's going to be harder moving forward for the Bearcats until they figure out the resources part of it.
On the field, you mentioned 10-3 last year. They're 0-3 this year. I think they've had one second half lead. It didn't last too long in their opener. But it should be said, they had to go to Hawaii. They're going to have to travel to Corvallis later this season. Their home games are in Houston this year. They're not even playing in Huntsville, so they're having to deal with a little bit of adversity as far as travel is concerned. But is the on-field product closer to that 10-3 team, or is this 0-3 team kind of what we should expect from the Bearcats this weekend at DKR?
I think it's what you should expect from the Bearcats at DKR. I think it's more likely that Sam Houston goes winless than they win 6 games. Right? Like they're not a good football team, and it's not all on Longo. He was hired late. I think the portal was open for 22 days before he got the job, and by the time he got to Sam Houston, they were without their 17 top tacklers from 2024. And so they've had to replace the whole defense. Longo is an offensive guy who likes the air raid. He's from the Mike Leach coaching tree. And they just don't have the personnel on that side of the ball to run that. So the offense has taken a step back. The defense has taken a step back. And I've said from the very beginning, I think 2025 for Sam Houston is pretty much a wash. And it's just about building momentum and building a foundation. It's not about winning football games. I know they can't say that, obviously. Like they're going out there to win football games, but it's going to be a very long year for Sam Houston, and no longer Saturday than the one in Week 4 in Austin.
Yes, at one point, Sam Houston had a longtime coach who was a lifer there. But the last few guys that they've had, on the sideline, Casey Keeler, we mentioned, is at Temple now. Willie Fritz had a stop there, kind of on his trajectory. Now he's now at Houston, but there's a couple stops in between Huntsville and Houston. What is kind of Phil Longo's trajectory? Is this a stepping stone job for him? Is this a job where, he may be there for a while? He's kind of he was fired last year, so it's not like he's the hot new commodity. He was Wisconsin offensive coordinator that just didn't work out there, but he has ties to Mac Brown working at UNC. He's had some OC jobs at some high profile schools. But what's kind of Phil Longo's story, and might he be in Huntsville for a while for this rebuild?
I think if it goes well, he's going to be there for a while. Kind of a lifetime offensive coordinator. He was the head coach at LaSalle for a couple of years, but LaSalle no longer has a football program, and so not that experienced. And when Keeler left to go back to the resources part, they didn't have enough money. They couldn't draw any big time names with head coaching experience. It was either going to be a young guy who hadn't been a head coach yet, like a Sean Bell, or Reginald Samples from Oregon, Matt Pallage at Baylor, who used to be a Sam Houston player, got some run. But Phil Longo, I think, had the relationships he needed to get the job. He was the offensive coordinator at Sam Houston from 2014 to 2016 when they had a really explosive offense. There is a difference between being an offensive coordinator and being a head coach, though. On the field, off the field, just the demands on the time, what you have to do with the media, just being the face of the program. And I think he's going to have to learn that on the job because he's never had to do it. But if it works, I think Longo's the type of guy that's going to be there for 10 years because I'm not sure where else he could go get a head coaching job.
Who are a couple names to know on this Sam Houston team? It seems like they've played about three quarterbacks at this point. Their defense is kind of led by a local kid who went to Vista Ridge. But who are some of the names to know on this Sam Houston team?
Offensively, Hunter Watson is kind of the thing that stirs the drink here at quarterback. He didn't play against Hawaii. It sounds like he's going to give it a go against Texas. He's kind of a hard-nosed, running the football, kind of old school football player. Not the fastest, not the biggest, not the strongest, but typically gets the job done, especially against Conference USA. He was a JUCO national champion before they kind of found him at Sam Houston. Alton McCaskill's another player if he's healthy. Started his career at Houston, a pretty solid running back. He's somebody to know. Elijah Green, running back slash wide receiver, who actually leading them in catching. Then defensively, I think C.J. Brown and Tavius Fish, their secondary feels to be the strength of the team. They like the linebacker core, trying to still figure out what to do defensive line and edge rushers. So, I think for Sam Houston early in the year, the first few games have been them figuring it out. I think they went into the season not knowing who was going to step up offensively, who's going to step up defensively. That image is starting to get clearer, but they dealt with some injuries going into that Hawaii game that hopefully the bye week last week has kind of sorted out.
But you're very well aware, Texas fans were not pleased this past week with just kind of how the team looked against UTEP, which shares the same conference as the Sam Houston team, Conference USA. In your Dave Campbell's power rankings, which you put together, you had them, 12 and 13th this week among the FBS schools in Texas. Are these two schools comparable? Did Texas see a preview of Sam Houston when they played UTEP, or is UTEP kind of a step above this Sam Houston team?
We will see in October when they play, but I'm of the opinion UTEP is a step up from the Sam Houston team. I remember all summer you kind of see on social media fans kind of ranking, here's our hardest games, and they would have Sam Houston above UTEP because Sam Houston won 10 games last year. And I would tell guys, this ain't the same Bearkats, right? Like they're going to take a pretty big step backwards. So I think Sam Houston's probably the least talented or probably the worst team that Texas has played. UTEP, I believe, is a better team within Conference USA. They're given 38. Sam Houston's allowing 38.7 points per game. They've given up 944 passing yards through 3 games. If Arch Manning and this Texas offense can't have success on Saturday against Sam Houston, I'm just not sure they're going to have success this year.
Part of the book I mentioned earlier, Guide to Texas Football, you kind of went to pretty much every FBS town and kind of, spent some time kind of getting the feel for, college football in those towns. What is it? What is the feel in Huntsville, especially kind of during this weird year where they're not playing at home, they're trying to do some renovations, they're going through this transition, it's not that championship season anymore. Are people excited about FBS football? Is this still an FCS town that is trying to catch up?
It's a great question. I think it's split based on who you talk to. I think there's a lot of excitement to play against helmets, and to be on kind of a national stage and play on CBS Sports and play at Texas against UT and to go to Hawaii and all that stuff that you get to do as an FBS program, play in bowl games. But there definitely is this understanding or this feeling in Huntsville of like we used to play for national championships and now we're playing to get to a bowl game. Now we're playing to win Conference USA. And then last year, winning 10 games, I think was like, oh, well, wow, this can be a lot of fun. Like we can go compete, maybe Liberty is an outlier in Conference USA in terms of resources, but we can compete with UTEP and Western Kentucky and Jack State and a lot of Conference USA. I jokingly call it a halfway house between FBS and FCS, because half of those programs were in FCS, with Sam Houston not too long ago. They added Delaware, Kennesaw State, and so I think Sam Houston looks around and sees a lot of peers. You just have to recalibrate what expectations are, and is playing for a bowl game and a conference championship as satisfying as playing for a national championship? It's probably something that won't be answered for 5 or 6 years to once we see what the baseline is for Sam Houston. If last year was the outlier and they're normally 6-6, I don't think it'll be as fun. But if they're winning 9 or 10 games and can consistently compete for a Conference USA championship, I think that would be, a worthwhile investment for them.
Really interesting. As someone who went to an FCS school that contends for national championships, like I'm kind of, we're kind of split at Montana. Like there's people like me who do not want to move up and do not see the point of like moving into the Mountain West and competing for some, small bowl and maybe getting lucky and getting, getting a Boise State run once every 20 years. But I also see, there's people who want those big lights and want a chance to, prove that they belong with the big dogs. And so I think a lot of schools like Montana or like Sam Houston that are used to competing really big on the FCS level are having to grapple with that, FBS, we're schools like us are never going to be like a Texas, but do we want to be, maybe in that next level where we're trying to get that number 12 seed in the college football playoffs and have a good season, once in the blue moon. But I guess to each their own when it comes to that.
And some of it's financial as well. Like to the athletic director, it was a great move.
Oh yeah.
Like one of the things that isn't talked about is, those FCS playoff games typically cost the home team money because you're paying for the production and the film crew and all that kind of stuff. And so it just wasn't sustainable for Sam Houston. I think they looked at FBS and the paycheck they would get from Conference USA as this huge boon at the time. But now they got to give it to the players, and so they got to come up with money for that and getting the resources and the donors to kind of to buy into that. I think is really tough for a program that isn't going to have as much national success as maybe it was used to having before.
Before we get you out of here, I think that's enough Sam Houston talk. That's everyone can get their appetite filled with that. But like I mentioned, the Bible comes out every year. Even at Dave Campbell's, what 3, 4 years at this point.
Hit my 4 year anniversary about a week or two ago.
Okay, so four cover stories. Last two you got they have had a Texas theme. Last year was the Quinn and was Connor Wegman, correct?
Hmm.
Split cover with Texas A&M. This year is fully Texas. Steve doesn't give a lot of one-on-one interviews, so you kind of got a little bit of a unique experience with that. What was the process like writing a cover story, a Texas theme cover story for the Bible this year?
It was a lot of fun. Texas was great. Sarkisian was really good with his time. Once we got him, he did like 30 minutes of a photo shoot and then sat down and talked to me for an hour. I think the hardest part for 2,500 words seems like a lot, and you're like, what am I going to write about? How am I going to fill it up? And then you start thinking about this man's story, and you go, well, how am I going to keep this to 2,500 words? Like this could be a book with how much Sark has kind of gone through. As you know, I've gone through similar stuff. Like I've dealt with similar things that Steve Sarkisian has. And so I kind of settled on, well, I'm going to write about what happened after the fact. Everybody's written and knows about what happened at USC. Well, how did he get back to a job like this? How do you go from failed tenure at USC, get fired with a lot of egg on your face, a very public firing, and then you work your way back to a job in the seat at Texas? And he was really open and upfront about the process that he went through and how close he was to not even coaching that first year after USC. He thought he was going to be a TV analyst. Like he had his first game assignment and everything. And then he went by Alabama, and Lane Kiffin kind of talked Saban and him into just like, hey, why don't you just stay here and be an analyst for a year? And so his kind of rise back to prominence, because he was such a young superstar head coach that was supposed to be like next. And then he falls off the cliff, and then he's got to work himself back to that. And now he, has emerged as, I think next to Dan Lanning, a lot of us assume he'll be the next, head coach to win a national championship that hasn't won one before. So I thought it was a fun story. It was enjoyable to kind of talk to him about that and how he got kind of his mojo back and got his, feet back together in terms of off the field stuff. And I had a good time. I thought it was a really I thought he would be more guarded about it, and he was pretty open about it. I thought that was pretty cool.
Hopefully, if you're a Texas fan, you've already read this. Once again, this is the Bible. You all know what the deal is. But if you have not picked it up, the bookstores are still having it. They're still over at HEB. So be sure to pick up a copy. Read Mike's work. I said DCTR.com earlier. It's TexasFootball.com. So if you want to pick up Mike's book, which is a read, I would also recommend. Be sure to do that. But that's Mike Craven, David Campbell's Texas Football senior writer, former Statesman guy. We went through many wars together over on South Congress. So love Mike to death. I'm glad he's able to stop by and do some Sam Houston talk with us today. But that's it for us about this. If you're going to go to the Sam Houston game at 7 o'clock over at DKR this weekend, it's an SEC Network Plus game if you're watching at home. So have fun figuring out how to get that on your TV. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but you all can figure it out. You're all smart because you're watching this podcast. But we'll see y'all later. We appreciate Mike's time and deuces.